Good evening, brothers, guests, and friends. My name is Antonio Caffey, and I proudly serve as the Vice Bosphorus of the Eta Nunu chapter. On behalf of the men of the Eta Nunu chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, I want to welcome you to our Achievement Week program, A Soldier's Story. Charles Young, Omega's War Chapter, and Black Military Excellence. Achievement Week is a time for us to uplift, honor, and reflect on the lives and legacy of individuals who exemplify the cardinal principles of Omega Psi Phi: manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift. Tonight, we recognize and honor the extraordinary life of Brigadier General Charles Young, a scholar, military pioneer, educator, diplomat, and Omega man. His leadership and service not only opened the doors for Black officers in the U.S. military, but also inspired generations of Black excellence, brotherhood, and civic contribution. We're also honored to highlight Omega's War Chapter, a historic brotherhood of military men whose courage and commitment reflected the very best of Omega and our nation. We thank each of you for joining us in the spirit of learning, reflection, and uplift. Before I turn it over to Dr. Jeffries, if you could please like and subscribe as you're on our YouTube channel now. Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button so that you can stay up to date with our chapter. Also, if you have any questions during tonight's presentation, please use the chat option on our YouTube page. And if we have time near the end of the presentation to answer those, we'll surely be able to do that. So at this time, I will turn the program over to Dr. Jeffries, who will introduce himself and our distinguished guest presenter this evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Judson L. Jeffries, Professor of African American and African Studies at The Ohio State University. I am also the faculty advisor to the indomitable, invincible, and incomparable Iota Psi chapter of the illustrious Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. And finally, I am the vice chair of the Undergraduate Affairs and Development Committee for the entire 4th District, which encompasses the states of Ohio and West Virginia. Happy Veterans Day to all. Tonight we have whom I consider the foremost scholar in the United States of America on Brigadier General Charles Young. So Brian Shellum, Mr. Shellum is an independent scholar who has written 5 books on Charles Young and or tangentially related to this pioneer. His latest book is titled Buffalo Soldiers in California, Charles Young and the 9th Cavalry, 1902 to 1904, published just last year in 2024 by the University of Nebraska Press. Mr. Shellum earned his undergraduate degree, his BS in engineering at West Point. He then later matriculated to Campbell University, where he earned a Master of Science in U.S. Government and International Relations. Mr. Shellum has also studied at the University of Bonn, that would be in Germany. His military decorations include the Bronze Star and the Order of St. George. As you all know, this Veterans Day is a rather special one because it hits on a number of anniversaries. It hits on the 250th anniversaries of the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps. United States Army, as I articulated last night to the Brotherhood, founded June 14th, 1775. Marine Corps, November 10th, 1775. It also coincides with the anniversary of the start of the Vietnam War, which started officially in 1955. And it also coincides with the ending of the Vietnam War, which officially ended in 1975, not to mention the fact that WW2 ended in 1945. So this particular Veterans Day is far more unique than those of the previous 3 to 4 years. Without further ado, I give you our guest for this evening, historian Brian Shellum.
Well, thank you, Judson Jeffries, for the opportunity to speak to the Omegas of the Eta Nunu chapter. It's always a pleasure to talk to Omegas. I talk to them all the time, and they hold a special place in my heart because they bought and preserved the Charles Young home, which of course, we later turned into the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument. So I'm a huge supporter, and we both love Charles Young. I'm not gonna go into great detail about me. It suffices that I write about Buffalo Soldiers and Charles Young, and that's my passion. And I'll talk a little bit during the presentation about my next book, which is pretty close. But tonight I'm just gonna. I was going to talk about Camp Des Moines, the Black Officer Training Camp, but I found this great video, so I'm going to have Antonio run that first. It's smoother and more concise than I could do. The historians at Camp Des Moines Museum did a great job with that. So I'll let that run, and then I'm going to focus on Charles Young and the Black NCOs who attended the Black Officer Training course there.
All right.
100 years ago, over 1,200 African American men, locally and from around the nation, arrived at Fort Des Moines, Iowa, determined to break racial barriers in a segregated U.S. Army. They were the very first class of black officer candidates in America's military, a major chapter in Iowa's history, America's history, and the rich history of our armed forces. African Americans served in every war prior to World War I. They officially became part of the Army during the Civil War in 1862. All black segregated units later fought against Native Americans, who still respectfully nicknamed them Buffalo Soldiers. The military, however, like American society as a whole, offered limited opportunities for the black recruits, who fought to protect the very society that denied them. They would change all that. In the fall of 1917, 639 of these men became lieutenants and captains. They fought in the Great War, World War I, and returned home to fight for their civil rights. This is their story. When World War I began in Europe in 1914, many Americans pushed for a military preparedness program in case the U.S. joined in. The Army organized and held officers' training classes, but only for whites. In April 1917, America entered what was called the Great War, now commonly known as World War I. Even though African Americans entered the draft, American military planners and leaders and American society as a whole believed that blacks lacked the character, intelligence, and bravery to become officers. The U.S. Army eventually, but reluctantly, allowed for 2 all-black combat divisions to be led by white officers. Leaders in the newly formed NAACP pushed the Army to allow for the training of black officers. Heading this effort was Chairman Joel Spingarn, who had finished a white officers training camp, and Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, one of America's most influential black leaders, an advocate for integration, and editor of the NAACP's monthly magazine, The Crisis. Few in the Army supported the idea, but one advocate was General Leonard Wood. Another was Secretary of War Newton Baker, a member of the Chicago chapter of the NAACP. Du Bois supported segregated black officers camp over no camp at all because he wanted black officers commanding black troops. He wrote, "If this is our country, then this is our war." Black male college students and graduates organized a central committee composed primarily of fraternity men at Howard and Harvard universities. They visited their representatives and senators on Capitol Hill, which resulted in Secretary Baker's announcement of the camp's formation at Fort Des Moines in May 1917. The Army organized its first class for black officer candidates in June 1917. Their role was to serve in the all-black combat divisions, commanding field troops, but serving under the white division leaders. Iowa's Governor William Harding expressed enthusiasm for the establishment of the camp in Iowa. He said when a race can come out of slavery and in so short a time be recognized as they have been in the establishment of this officers' training camp, it is a tribute to the race as well as to the great principles of representative government. Fort Des Moines offered ample space to hold the camp. It had grown into an attractive facility by World War I, but by then, the facility stood practically empty because most of the troops stationed here had been dispatched to the Mexican border, chasing the elusive revolutionary Pancho Villa. Iowa offered a suitable place to train black officer candidates because it was known to be more racially tolerant than many other states. Many hoped the highest-ranking black officer in the Army, Colonel Charles Young, would command the camp. Instead, this proven Spanish-American War combat veteran was unfairly forced into retirement for high blood pressure, and Colonel Charles Ballou assumed command of the camp. A relatively sympathetic Ballou said to the candidates, "Your race will be on trial, with you as its representatives." Ballou's trainers were white West Point graduates. The trainees' day started with reveille at 5:30. Similar to the white camps, activities consisted of intensive marching and drilling, physical training, infantry ways, and fighting skills, shooting, semaphore training, and trench warfare tactics. Lights out at 9:45. Unlike the other training camps, black candidates and later graduates were denied training in artillery, engineering, and machine guns, which much aggrieved many candidates and damaged morale. Racial strife was minimal in Des Moines, yet to alleviate any potential racial tensions, Ballou organized a White Sparrow patriotic ceremony at Drake Stadium on July 22, 1917. The candidates paraded and sang spirituals to 10,000 onlookers who enjoyed the performance. Candidate James Morris of Des Moines said that after the ceremony, "We were rarely hassled by whites at Fort Des Moines or out in the city." Finally, in October, 639 men graduated as captains and lieutenants. They were paid in gold coins, $75. At the same time, another historical first occurred at Fort Des Moines. To fill the medical needs of the two all-black combat divisions, the Army recruited and trained black doctors for the division's medical arm. Thus, the fort's medical camp began shortly after the officer camp began. Both groups trained concurrently and shared buildings and facilities at the fort. 104 physicians and 12 dentists graduated from the 10-week camp, and most worked with the 92nd Division. 89 of them served in France. They organized mobile medical hospitals, infirmaries, supervised medics, and oversaw ambulance services, and took steps to maintain the general health of the troops. As the 92nd Division Buffalo soldiers entered the thick of combat in the late summer of 1918, casualties mounted. Most of the Fort Des Moines graduates joined the 27,000-man 92nd Division, nicknamed the Buffaloes. Their motto, deeds, not words. Officers and soldiers were trained separately stateside under largely segregated conditions at different camps. Many whites feared being outranked by blacks and found the idea of saluting them repulsive. Most of the higher-ranking white officers in the 92nd Division were Southerners, unsupportive of black officers, hardly a recipe for high morale. In France, they finally received weapons training, though not nearly as much as their white counterparts. The 92nd entered the trench lines in eastern France for patrolling and scouting duties until they were rushed to the Meuse-Argonne region, the site of America's huge offensive at the final stages of the war. The 93rd Division, in which a few Fort Des Moines graduates served, had a markedly different experience. They were among the first American troops to arrive in France. They fought with the French Army, and many wore French helmets and used French arms. The most decorated black unit of the war was the 369th Regiment, the so-called Harlem Hellfighters, a New York National Guard unit, part of the 93rd Division. From this hard-fighting, highly decorated unit, its regimental band led by James Reese Europe introduced Europeans to a new musical art form, jazz. A few Fort Des Moines graduates served in all-black units that became known as services of supply. One historian called them laborers in uniform, or the military equivalent of chain gangs, performing such tasks as building roads and latrines, digging ditches, disposing garbage, and caring for animals. They received very little training, comparatively low pay, and horrid treatment. The worst job was graves registration, finding, recording, and reburying the dead. This grim but important work took care of thousands of those killed in action. About 1/3 of all labor troops were blacks, a total of about 160,000. Black soldiers were banned from the Grand Victory Parade in Paris on Bastille Day 1919. But their service in France instilled pride and hope for a more equal world, with a determination to make it happen. Who were some of these men? Iowa contributed 16 officer candidates. 9 graduated. Charles P. Howard Sr. and James B. Morris Sr. both served in France and returned to Des Moines to live after the war. Howard, a Drake Law School graduate, practiced law in Des Moines, as did Morris. Howard was a locally prominent civil rights activist. In addition to his legal practice, Morris, who earned his law degree from Howard University, edited the black newspaper The Iowa Bystander and fought for racial equality in Iowa. These men, along with candidate S. Joe Brown, founded the National Bar Association in 1925. As members of the Iowa Negro Bar Association, these lawyers formed the first-of-its-kind national organization in reaction to discrimination in the nation's legal community. Another well-known Iowan, James Jimmy Mitchell, moved to Des Moines after the war. He opened a community pharmacy in the Center Street neighborhood. He also operated a popular nightclub on Center Street. Black candidates from all over the country came to Fort Des Moines. This native Mississippian always called himself Lieutenant Lee because he served heroically as a Buffalo soldier in France. After the war, he settled in Memphis, Tennessee, and became a successful policeman, businessman, author, and political activist. He is an iconic figure in Memphis history. Cameron left a teaching job in Nashville at age 45 to join the Black Officers Camp. While on scout patrol in France during the Argonne Offensive, this Buffalo soldier was killed in action. His hometown has honored his service by naming a school and an American Legion post in his honor. This star athlete from South Dakota became a coach and teacher at Tuskegee University in Alabama until the Great War interrupted his career. After training at Fort Des Moines, he fought in France with the 92nd Division in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. After the war, he returned to Tuskegee and became a legendary coach in football and track and field, leading the country's first black female Olympic gold medalist, Alice Coachman. Dr. Lewis Wright graduated from the Medical Officers Training Camp and fell victim to a phosgene gas shell while attending to patients in a French field hospital. After his recovery, Wright made numerous contributions to the field of medicine and became known as Mr. Harlem Hospital. He was one of the longest-serving directors of the NAACP from the 1930s through the 1950s. Louisiana-born and Harvard-educated Warmoth T. Gibbs fought in France with the 92nd Division. After the war, his distinguished education career included his leadership at the University of North Carolina A&T in Greensboro in 1960, where 4 of his students initiated the now legendary segregation protests and sit-ins against Woolworths. Instead of discouraging the sit-ins at the urging of white city leaders, Gibbs responded, "We teach our students how to think, not what to think. This event was an important spark in the civil rights movement. Charles Hamilton Houston became one of the great pioneer civil rights litigators following his military service. He was commissioned at Fort Des Moines and fought in France. After suffering innumerable humiliations, he became a lawyer and fought for his race. He wrote, "I made up my mind that if I got through this war, I would study law and use my time fighting for men who could not strike back." He mentored America's first African-American Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall. Houston earned the title, "The Man Who Killed Jim Crow." Many other officers enjoyed successful careers in a number of fields. They were emboldened by their Army experience at Fort Des Moines. In 1948, 31 years after that class graduated, President Harry Truman officially ended segregation in the armed forces. One historian has characterized the World War I experience that started at Fort Des Moines as a turning point, a bloody catharsis at home in which African Americans gained a new generation of leadership prepared to confront racial discrimination. They also understood their roles as heroes to the black community and as protest leaders against white supremacists. This group of men were among those who laid the groundwork in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Thus, in the words of W.E.B. Du Bois, we return. We return from fighting. We return fighting.
All right, can you start with the first slide, please, Antonio? Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the video. I think it's concise and well done, probably smoother and more concise than I could have done. And it leaves me free to focus on two subjects of this story that were perhaps not so well covered in the field, and that is the influence of Charles Young, as well as the 250 Buffalo Soldier NCOs who attended the Black Officer Training Camp. And then I hope you stay around after my presentation. I'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion. That's usually my favorite part. Okay, slide. So just to review, during World War I, Fort Des Moines was the site of the first and only training camp for African American officers. These 1,250 black men were trained to become officers for the U.S. Army. Established in May 1917, it trained college-educated men, 1,000, and 250 non-commissioned officers who were then assigned to the 92nd, the all-black 92nd Division. And of course, the War Department didn't do it willingly. It was done under pressure from civil rights organizations like the NAACP, as well as Colonel Charles Young, the senior black officer in the Army at the time. Slide. So the 17th Provisional Training Regiment, that's what they were called, became the first officer candidate class of African Americans in U.S. Army history, military history. These 1,250 officer candidates, as I said before, included 1,000 college graduates. That was a requirement by the War Department. And then they added 250 non-commissioned officers. And I'll kind of talk about that balance as we go along. Of those, 639 successfully completed the course and received commissions in October of 1917, and then went out with to train with the various regiments and units before deploying over to fight with, most of them fought with the 92nd Division in France. Slide. Okay, so I'm sure you know these two gentlemen who are among the founders of your fraternity. Both of these guys, Frank Coleman and Edgar Love, attended and graduated from the Black Officers Training Camp. Next slide. So, and you may recognize there Colonel Charles Young on the left. As was said in the video, many lobbied to have him be the first commander of the Black Officer the commander of the Black Officer Training Camp. This shows him. This picture shows him during a visit to Fort Des Moines on July 17th, 1917. He was invited by Colonel Charles Ballou, who was the camp commander, the first camp commander, and Young and Ballou knew each other. They had attended West Point. Ballou was a classmate of John Alexander, the second black graduate of West Point, and graduated. Was 3 years senior to Young at West Point. And of course, this visit comes just 2 weeks before he was forced that Young was forced into medical retirement. I think on 30 July, or that's when he got the word. And of course, the impetus for his forced retirement was the fear that he would become a brigadier general, major general, general officer, and command troops in France, and of course command white officers. And indeed, that would have probably been the case. Colonel Charles Ballou, the camp commander who he's talking to there, went on to be promoted to major general and commanded the 92nd Division during the war in France. So that probably would have been Young's future if he had remained on active duty. It's a shame. It's a shame. Next slide, please. So during Young's visit in July of 1917, he had lunch with members of the 5th Provisional Company, shown here. Of the I think there's about 90 cadets there. They called them cadets. They were cadets in training to be officers. About 1 in 5 are NCOs, sergeants, who had served in the Buffalo Soldier regiments, who had been picked by the 4 regiments to be candidates to be sent to Camp Des Moines. So and Young had lunch with these guys and gave them a pep talk and reinforced how important their success as Army officers serving in the U.S. Army was. And of course, among the 250 NCOs who went to Fort Des Moines were 69 graduates of Young's officer training school. After Colonel Young came back from Mexico, the punitive expedition in 1917, he knew that the United States was probably going to get in the war, and he knew also that they were going to need black officers. So he started his own officer training school at Fort Huachuca for NCOs, and 69 who went to Fort Des Moines were among his successful students. And it's important to note that Young taught black NCOs and white. He welcomed both black and white NCOs to his officer training school at Fort Huachuca. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, I'm currently researching and writing my 6th book titled Buffalo Soldiers at West Point, Black Cavalry Detachment, 1907 to 1947. As I'm just going to talk about this briefly, but as in with many of my books, I stumbled on this subject by chance. Major General Fred Gordon, who was a West Point graduate and the first Black commandant at West Point, called me in 2021 for assistance in writing a short history for the dedication of the Buffalo Soldier Monument that year. That was dedicated there, and currently stands just behind that line of troopers there from 1910. I did some research, started writing, and realized that there was a fascinating story there to be told that had not been told. I attended the ceremony, met many of the descendants who still live in that area, and decided this was the next book I would write. I had a personal stake in this story since Buffalo Soldier, it had been called Cavalry Field before 1973, but in 1973, the Academy renamed that field Buffalo Soldier Field. And I was attending West Point. I was finishing the end of my plebe year in 1973. I was never taught about the presence of the Buffalo Soldiers there for 40 years. I just decided I was going to fix that problem and set the historical record straight, and write a book about their proud 40 years plus of service there. This is the oldest photo that I could find of the cavalry detachment at West Point, taken in 1910. These are a lot of the original soldiers that came right off of, mostly came from Fort Riley and Fort Leavenworth in 1907 to be stationed at West Point. These Buffalo soldiers from the 9th and later the 10th Cavalry served at West Point teaching cadets horsemanship from 1907 to 1947. Few people know that. And these Black soldiers became an essential element of the cadet experience for 40 years. That's 40 graduating classes of future officers. What I say in the book is that, you know, after the graduation of Charles Young in 1889, Jim Crow closed the doors to West Point, of West Point to Blacks. And so Blacks were absent from West Point. When the Black Cavalry Detachment arrived in 1907, they reestablished a Black presence at West Point. I think that's important. And I think that they kind of paved the way, impressed 40 generations or 40 classes of West Pointers with their professionalism and their ability to teach horsemanship. And I think that was a positive thing, a good thing. Next slide, please. So you might be asking now, what does this have to do with the Black Officer Training Camp at Fort Des Moines? Well, in researching the book, I found that many of the former Buffalo soldiers, many former Buffalo Soldier NCOs who had been commissioned at Fort Des Moines, later, after the war, when the National Army was disestablished, they re-enlisted and served as sergeants again. And many of them were assigned to the cavalry detachment at West Point. And I'm going to talk about several of these guys in the slides in the comments to come. And I'm going to also just show you some of the really neat pictures I've collected from some of the descendants of these Buffalo soldiers that I'll be using in the book. Okay, next slide, please. This is the Cavalry Detachment football team from 1929. I'm having a lot of fun describing the sports activities of the Cavalry Detachment at West Point in those years, and they had an especially outstanding football team from about 1926 to 1930. One of the toughest teams on the East Coast. They played semi-professional football teams. And I even found an instance, a report that they scrimmaged against the white cadet football team, which I find pretty amazing. But what I want you to look in this is this picture is one of the few handful I have of First Sergeant Milton Dean. He's standing in the back row between Major Groninger and Major Boy, who were the commanders. Major Groninger was the commander of the cavalry detachment. Milton T. Dean was born in 1881 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He enlisted in 1903 and served in the 9th U.S. Cavalry, finally achieving the rank of Squadron Sergeant Major, which is about as far as you can go in the NCO ranks. Perhaps Regimental Sergeant Major is the only one above that. And he was mentored by Charles Young in the 9th Cavalry at Fort D.A. Russell. Dean was Young's Squadron Sergeant Major. And so you see the hand of Charles Young and his wide mentorship. That's not the last time I'm going to say that here today. And he was sent by the 9th Cavalry to attend the officers course at Fort Des Moines, I'm sorry, and was commissioned a captain. The graduates of Fort Des Moines officer training camp were, depending on their qualifications, their scores, how well they did at the camp, were either commissioned as a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, a captain. And he was commissioned as a captain. He had a college degree from Howard University, quite unusual. Not only was he commissioned a captain, he went with the 92nd Division to France. And in France, he was promoted to major, and he commanded the 317th Ammunition Train, a battalion-sized support unit in the 92nd Division. After the war, Major Dean was assigned to Howard University, and he commanded the new ROTC program there. 26 black ROTC programs were opened across the country, and Howard University was one of the most important. Unfortunately, when the National Army disbanded, we had an army that expanded to 2.5 million during World War I, and it had to shrink back down to about 130,000. So the National Army went away, and Major Milton Dean was discharged. He spent a couple of years in Washington, D.C., and later in New York City, but eventually he re-enlisted in the regular Army again in 1922 and was assigned as the first sergeant in 1922 of the cavalry detachment at West Point. And he served there until he retired in 1935 and moved to California. Next slide, please. Here I have another picture. You can see First Sergeant Dean in the back row in the center. He's along with Major Groninger off there to the side. This is the cavalry detachment baseball team in 1930. Again, a champion team. And I'm sure you're all probably wondering how can, well, I mean, we all have to wonder what it was like to serve in the Buffalo Soldiers for so many years, be commissioned as a captain, be promoted to a major, command a battalion-sized unit, and then suddenly after the war you re-enlist and you're serving as a first sergeant. I mean, that it's human to wonder what that must have felt like for Dean. But he was just a professional. He was a true professional, and this was his life. I think I have one more picture. One more slide shows Dean. Slide, please. Yeah. This is the cavalry ball in 1931. And you see First Sergeant Dean. You can see his first sergeant stripes on the right. Look at Dean's lower sleeve, left sleeve. There's a shiny olive you can't tell it's olive, but it's an olive cuff band, was the only indicator on his uniform that he had served as an officer during World War I. And so that was his badge of former commissioned service. But he served as a detachment first sergeant from 1922 to 1935, a very long time, and in large part was responsible for the reputation and the professionalism of the cavalry detachment. He carried what he learned as a commissioned officer in many ways to West Point with them. And I write about that in the book, the types of initiatives he undertook for his soldiers. Also in the picture, the second soldier from the right, his name is Benedict Mosley, and I'm going to talk about him in the next slide. Slide, please. So another officer, this is Benedict Mosley. He replaced Dean in 1935 as the detachment first sergeant. He was born in Swanee, Tennessee in 1891. And he worked for a time for the U.S. Army Topographic Service in Cuba and in the Philippines before enlisting in the Army in 1908. He was assigned to the 9th Cavalry, achieved the rank of quartermaster sergeant, and was another soldier who was personally mentored by Charles Young. He was sent by the 9th Cavalry to the Black Officer Training Camp and was commissioned first lieutenant in 1917. He served with 365th and 370th Infantry in France, and after his return, he was discharged from the National Army in 1919. He joined the regular Army again in 1922, same year as First Sergeant Dean, and was assigned to the Cavalry Detachment. He retired in 1939 and moved to California, followed Dean to California. But he served as for about a 4-year period as the first sergeant. And these pictures actually show him in his officer's uniform in France. Slide, please. And then, of course, I've got to have a sports picture. You can see him seated on the left. That's Benedict Mosley before he was first sergeant, when he was coaching. He coached baseball and a lot of sports teams. Big sports fan. He was back in Sewanee, Tennessee. He was the water boy for the University of the South. He just loved baseball. So next slide. So this is an interesting slide. So I'm sorry I don't have a better one, but I just have a picture in a frame. The next two officers I want to talk about are in this fairly well-known, famous picture of officers standing with Colonel Charles Young at Camp Grant in probably 1918, early 1919. So second from the left in the line there is John C. Sanders, and then the second man to the right of Young, on your right, is Livingston J. Williams. Both men served in the 10th Cavalry and rode and fought with Young during the punitive expedition in Mexico. And they also attended Young's officer training school training course at Fort Huachuca in 1917. Neither attended the Fort Des Moines course, but were still commissioned, and you can see there in small print. I don't know if you can read it, but they were commissioned in late 1918 as lieutenants of cavalry. It's not clear to me why these guys didn't go to Fort Des Moines. Maybe they just fell below the cut line. But I guess the Army decided later that they needed more black lieutenants to as replacements, and so these guys were commissioned the year after the officers were commissioned at Fort Des Moines. There wasn't another officer training school They were just commissioned based on their training and qualifications they gained from Colonel Young's officer training school, and they later served as the first sergeants after in 1931. The cavalry detachment was reflagged as the 2nd Squadron, 10th U.S. Cavalry, and it was just a reflagging rather than a wholesale replacement of the units. And these two guys served as the first sergeants of E and F troops. Next slide. So this just shows the 10th Cavalry on parade, saluting. There's a 2-star. You can't see it, and there's a car driving by. But this is what they looked in the early in the 1930s. But I guess what I would say is these 4 officers, and then a whole bunch more that I didn't cover here today, were responsible for the outstanding reputation for the cavalry detachment the last 27 years of its existence until it was disbanded in 27. And they carried those skills that they gained as commissioned officers, the things they learned, with them back to West Point, and did many of the things within the Army that a lot of the civil rights folks they talked about in the film did outside. So anyhow, that's what I'm writing about now in the book about the cavalry detachment. That's one aspect of them, of course. But last slide, I think I've got one more slide. Yeah, and this man, the nearly everyone I write about in the military, the blacks in the military in this era, were mentored, inspired, or touched in some way by this man, Charles Young. And of course, in his lifetime, he didn't get what he deserved, but he finally got his promotion to Brigadier General posthumously in 1922, and I was proud to be there for that event. I just can't underestimate the importance of the service of this man as pretty much the lone African American Army officer for a good period of time, from at least 94 with the death of John Alexander until Benjamin O. Davis and Green come along in 1901. So I'll end on that note. A picture of this man, and then I think we're going to wrap up here, and I hope you be open for as long as you have patience for questions and discussion.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Shellum. That was a great presentation. I love how you used the video earlier to set up your presentation. I think it provided a good foundation for what you discussed this evening. So we're going to open it up for questions now. I think we did have an initial potential issue with the chat feature. You should be able to see that on the YouTube page now. If you don't, if you refresh your browser, it should show up to the right. So please feel free to post your questions or comments that you may have at this time, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Jeffries to start us off.
I'm sorry, my sound went off just a minute, but I got it back on.
Okay.
We'll begin the questions and comments, get us started.
Okay.
Brian, I want to point out a couple of things that you cited in your presentation, one of which has to do with Charles Hamilton Houston, who doesn't get the credit that he deserves for actually laying the groundwork for Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, 1954. Many people know that he was the mentor to Thurgood Marshall, but many people really don't know that he was the one who laid out how the case should move forward. And a lot of people don't realize when they think about Brown versus Board of Education 1954, they think of it as one case, when in actuality, it was 5 cases consolidated. You had Kansas, you had Virginia, you had South Carolina, DC, and Delaware. And again, can't underestimate the role that Charles Hampton Houston played. You mentioned a gentleman by the name of George Lee. And George Lee is vitally important when we talk about the modern civil rights movement in Mississippi. He was actually known as Doc Lee. So in your presentation, the video talked about Doc Lee or George Lee being in Memphis, Tennessee, which he was, but he was also a heck of a civil rights activist in Mississippi, more specifically Belzoni. So he moves to Belzoni, Mississippi, and he founds the local chapter of the NAACP, and he's assassinated while trying to register Blacks to vote. And the reason why I bring this up is because many historians and scholars, when they talk about the rise of the modern civil rights movement in Mississippi, they often attribute it to the killing of young Emmett Till in August of 1955, but they forget about the assassination of George Lee, which took place months earlier in May 1955. So I just wanted to make those comments. Here's my question. So can you tell us any figures who would be considered obscure, folk who we don't readily think about when we think about Fort Des Moines? Can you think of any obscure figures who played major roles in bringing about Fort Des Moines, folk that we don't readily think about?
No, I think they're all pretty well known. Du Bois, even Young. Young was, Du Bois asked Young to help he support the Black Officers Training Course. Of course, Young was still on active duty, and he was hesitant because he didn't want to do anything disloyal to his army. He loved his people, but he also loved his army, and that was a terrible conflict for him. And he later served on the executive board of the NAACP for a period before he went over to Europe, Africa the second time, but on the condition that he not be put in a position where he had to be disloyal to his army. So he was very patriotic, and that African Americans were very patriotic in those days. That's why they, even though they were treated terribly, they wanted to fight because it was their country too. Yeah, and there's the Emmett, the Emmett Scott. There's a whole array of folks, and it mentioned General Wood also played a part in that. So there's a lot of people. I don't think it's fair to try to name one or even a dozen. I think it was the work of the group. But as I'm just amazed at how many stories within this big story there are that haven't been told. I don't think anybody scratched the surface on the importance of the Black Officer Training Camp and what it did to those 639 who graduated, and what they went on to do. I think more research needs to be done there. I would like to know, for instance, of the 639 graduates, how many were college graduates and how many of them were NCOs, former Buffalo Soldier NCOs. I'd like to get in there and find those numbers. I came on this just because I'm doing this book on West Point, and I just find it fascinating. And I had to explain how these officers, how these guys were NCOs. It's not easy to conceive of a situation where you're a non-commissioned officer, and then you're a commissioned officer, a major, and then you go back to the commissioned ranks. I know that happens, but it used to happen more, but it certainly doesn't really happen today. So it's kind of it's something you have to explain to the reader.
Mr. Shellum, like what, and you spoke of it on, and even Dr. Jeffries did too, like what the tightrope, I guess, that Black soldiers had to walk during that time period. Like you said, in speaking about Charles Young, how obviously he was, aware of the racism that existed both inside and outside of the military, but he was still patriotic. He didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize, not only just jeopardize his service, but he cared about the army. So what type, like, through your research, like, what did you find out either about him or other soldiers that faced that everyday reality?
Yeah, well, the reason we're still talking about Young is because he walked that tightrope so well. He was able to walk that tightrope, and social isolation, the things he had to do. For instance, during the punitive expedition in Mexico, the 10th Cavalry, they had their, 66. They had their they had an anniversary while they were there, and Young, who was a musician and a playwright, among other things, decided he was going to put on a show for the officers. So he wrote this musical, and it was kind of like a march through time for the 10th Cavalry, and they somehow came up with old uniforms and everything, and they put on a big show for the officers at whatever the officers' club or the officers' tent was. But he knew, and there was a dinner going on and all this, and he knew that if he sat there among the other white officers, he would make them uncomfortable. So what Young did in those occasions, whenever he was invited to a all hands performance at the officers' club, he arrived, made it known that he was there, fulfilling his obligation as an officer, and then he would just excuse him at an appropriate short period of time so he wouldn't make his fellow white officers uncomfortable. Can you imagine having to do something like that? I mean, it's just, but that's what he did. And so he stayed on his side of the color line in all things social, but he took advantage of all things official, because there he had some measure that's where he had some equality, and that's where he was able to shine and become the professional that he was, and do a better job professionally than any of the other officers. I mean, he was the only officer, the only squadron commander, captain, who actually fought and won 2 victories in the punitive expedition. The only 2 victories that they succeeded in during the punitive expedition, and that more than anything else worried people, because he was too good, and so I would say his success in Mexico, and you have to remember, he attended West Point while Pershing was there. He was only 3 years junior to Pershing, so he was a very senior officer at a time when regular Army officers who were colonels were jumping to brigadier general and to major general, Pershing to 5 stars. And so his continued success worried people in the War Department, worried senators, eventually worried Woodrow Wilson, who was no friend of African Americans at the time, and it was very easy to medically retire him and get him out of the way. So that's what happened. But it's still, Antonio, it's impressive that for all those years he was able to walk that tightrope so well. Flipper didn't do it very well. Alexander died, the two West Point graduates before him, and so I would say that his success at walking that line really paved the way for that generation of officers that went to the Black Officer Training Camp. I mean, I don't think without his success, Colin Powell says he stood on Charles Young's shoulders. Without Charles Young, we may not have had a Black Training Camp. I don't know. That's a hypothetical, but and I'm sure all those other guys, all those other officers that went over there had kind of mixed success. You had to be the right temperament. You had to be good, first of all, and then you had to be the right temperament to walk that line. And some didn't, and they had less success than others. It's difficult enough being an Army officer, then you got to walk that line. That's a terrible thing to ask of anybody, especially in war.
Yeah. We have a few questions that I want to go to right now in the chat. A couple of them are similar, so I'm just going to combine them. The first one, it says, given the escalation and the hostility to the preservation of Black history, which is U.S. history, what concerns do you have about the preservation of this history, and what steps are being taken to preserve that history?
Well, I can tell you that it impacted me personally this past year. I had been invited out to Connecticut to talk about Charles Young I was talking about Charles Young in the national parks, because my last book was about Charles Young in California when he was the first Black superintendent of Sequoia National Park. So I was invited out there for that. And since I was in Connecticut, I contacted my alma mater, West Point, and I said, hey, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. You want me to come talk? And I was invited to talk at the NCO, at the Officers Club, Combined Club, about Charles Young, a graduate of West Point. A couple weeks before my trip, it was canceled because of all this nonsense with DEI. So it affected me personally, but I got mad, and then I just said, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. So that's all I can do. I'm an independent historian. So I went to the Highland Falls Library and gave my program to the people that wanted to come see me at the other place. You can't, you just have to keep at it. And I'm a little worried personally because I've wanted to go down to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, to do some research down there for this book and for next book. And I had been communicating with a historian down at Fort Huachuca, and he said, you better get down here quick because we're closing next year. So, I worry about what's going to happen to all those records. So I gotta scoot on down there before they close and see what they have. So yeah, I had some real concerns. The Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National, not that one. Up at Wilberforce, I work with two organizations where Young had his home. The Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument is fine. It's in the national park system, but the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center, which is nearby, well, you all know it. You're from Ohio. They just got they got most of their personnel cut. They lost their director. They're down to a skeleton staff, and they have the single most important collection of Charles Young's, pictures, letters, everything, artifacts, uniforms there. So I'm concerned what's going to happen to those. So we're kind of working behind the scenes to get some accountability for that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm concerned, but you can get mad, but then in the end, all I can do is keep researching and writing while I can.
Indeed. We have another question for you, Mr. Shellum. It says, during your research, have you come across a Dr. DeHaven Hinkson who served in World War I and World War II? W.E.B. Du Bois received a letter in French on how the Negro soldiers were mistreated by their own American military.
Huh. Well, I don't doubt that they were, but I'm not familiar with the doctor. Yeah, they got terrible treatment in France. The nation that treated them the best were the French, because the French were in need of manpower, and the 93rd Division, the other black division, Pershing split them up and gave the regiments to the French army, and they were happy to have them because they were used to having colonial troops, and the Harlem Hellfighters, for instance, fought with the French 161st Division, and they loved them. They were the Harlem Hellfighters were longer in action, took more casualties than any other American unit in the war. So yeah, they don't. World War I is not. I've had to kind of dig into it for this thing. World War I is not one of my areas of expertise, but I know from the research I've done for this book that they were treated terribly by the U.S. Army. But generally, the black soldiers and the black officers just did the best they could, and ended up serving well and proudly, and of course, when they went back to the United States, marched on a few parades, and didn't get the credit that they were due, of course.
Indeed. Well, I think that concludes the question and answer period that we have this evening. Mr. Shellum, again, just want to thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll go to our closing comments, and we'll start out with you.
Okay, well, I just thank you for having me, and enjoyed talking about this. When I'm given a topic like this, I enjoy it because it causes me to learn more about the topic, because I want to be able to talk intelligently about it. And so I've been focusing on this for a little while, and I've learned a lot. And what happens is I have more questions than I have answers for. And I'm thinking somebody needs to write a history of the Black Officer Training Camp at Fort Des Moines, because I don't think it's been researched properly, examined, the process getting to the Black Officer Training course, the operation of the Black Training course, and then the results of the officers who graduated, or the effect on the ones that didn't graduate. Anyhow, it's just, to me, it's a fascinating subject, and one that's ripe for research and writing. But thank you.
No, thank you again, Mr. Shellum. Again, great presentation. Got a lot of great comments, and hope our viewers liked it as well. Dr. Jeffries, any closing comments for us this evening? You're on mute, brother.
Yeah, good evening again, Mr. Shellum and members of the audience. I just want to give credit where credit is due. So this idea of doing the Veterans Day program that featured a speaker was all Antonio Caffey's. A month or two ago, Brother Caffey contacted me and said, "Hey, listen, I think we should do something substantive for Veterans Day, which makes all the sense in the world, because from 2006 to 2014, I was director of African Studies Community Extension Center, and I held a Black Veterans Day salute for 8 years. So what he said to me resonated with me. So his idea was to have a noted speaker come and talk about Charles Young. Now, what you and I know, Mr. Shellum, that others probably do not know, is that you have a chapter in my 2-volume book, Leading Figures in the History of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. So when Brother Caffey mentioned to me, okay, who could we get? My mind immediately went to Brian Shellum, who I consider the foremost expert on Brigadier General Charles Young. And how appropriate is it that, okay, you served 20 years in the Army, retired, right? Rose to the rank of 04, which is a major, right? Military decorations, Bronze Star, right? In the Order of St. George. what could have been more appropriate than to have you to start us off with our first really substantive Veterans Day program than Brian Shellum. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming, sharing your wisdom, and you'll be hearing from me in the future.
Okay. All righty. And I'm happy to talk anytime. I'd love to dig into Charles Young more. I had to kind of focus on the Black Officer Training course, which was good. It caused me to learn something new. But I noticed, Antonio, that on your website you have a book club. If anybody wants me to chat to a book club, I'd love to.
Oh, we may take you up on that.
Yeah,
I have a book club myself, and I love it. So,
okay, good. So again, thank you, Brother Jeffries, and again, thank you, Mr. Shellum, for sharing your scholarship and helping us honor this critical part of our history. For our audience, thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight's presentations, we did have a couple questions about that as well. Tonight's presentation will be on our YouTube page, so make sure again that you like and subscribe to that page. So that you can, get these videos and look back at some of our other content as well. It will also be uploaded on our chapter's website, 614qs.org, 614ques.org. So make sure you check us out there. And if you're on Facebook and Instagram, please find us on there and like and join those pages so you can stay up to date. Our chapter. We do a lot, not only in the community, but as Mr. Shellum just mentioned, and Dr. Jeffries mentioned too, our book club. So we're all about the scholarship and increasing our knowledge on various topics and subjects as well. So stay up to date with us and join us in some of these conversations. So again, thank you to everyone in attendance this evening. Your presence affirms that the legacy of Charles Young in the service of Black military men and women continue to inspire, uplift, shape, and guide our future. May we always live in a manner worthy of their sacrifice and example. And remember, friendship is truly essential to the soul. Have a good evening, everyone.
Happy Veterans Day.
Happy Veterans Day. Thank you. Have a good evening.